Atari was the breakthrough technology that took us from passive consumption of television to true interactivity, the first time that we were actually engaged with screens in a meaningful way. They went from a market cap of $452 million, which is $1.2 billion back in 1988 money, to just $51 million today. So what explains this meteoric rise and then the fall that followed?
It's got 3 screens just like the arcade. Yikes!
Today we're in Sunnyvale, California, where behind me was once the headquarters of Atari Corporation. Atari was founded in 1972 by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. And the idea of the company was to initially create a gaming environment using a dedicated controller. This was the first game called Pong, where it was literally just a single game where 2 players would be knocking a ball back and forth across the screen. It's a virtual game of ping pong, essentially. And while that was exciting in 1975, the real breakthrough moment for them came in 1977 with the launch of the Atari 2600.
The fun is back, as you can see, with the 2600 from Atari.
The 2600 was a gaming console that offered interchangeable cassettes, where you could play more than one game on a single console. And this was a revolutionary idea because up until then, households just didn't have the ability to quickly swap different games back and forth and have that experience of basically bringing the arcade to a home environment.
No other company offers you as many different video game cartridges as Atari.
Launched as the VCS, or video game system, the 2600 had a wood grain finish on the front of it, which today looks a little bit hokey, but back then made perfect sense because in that time, televisions themselves had a similar wood veneer to try to get them to blend in with furniture. You have to remember, in 1977, even the idea of having a color TV at home was kind of an anomaly, with about half of the televisions still being black and white. When you think of what a TV is today versus a TV back then, remote control wasn't really a thing. Certainly cable television wasn't a thing. Generally what a TV was literally a wood grain box with a dial on the front of it that you would use to change the channel. And those channels would change based on an antenna that was mounted either on the top of the TV or on the roof of the house. And that was your entertainment. This idea of having a show on demand didn't exist. So you can think about how revolutionary it was to have a device that plugged into that primitive television and allowed you for the first time to interact with the contents of the screen.
My shields are gone! All right, I'm going in!
Oh, some game, huh?
Some game!
When the Atari 2600 launched in 1977, it had a sticker price of $199, which is the equivalent of $1,000 adjusted for inflation. Now, if you look at what a TV cost, that was also about $500, which is about $3,000 in today's money. So the Atari was not, by any means, a cheap purchase. Nonetheless, people flocked to it because it offered something truly new and different that no one had really encountered before.
I'd like an Atari.
Sorry, only our demonstrators left.
The Atari 2600 had games available that were arcade classics. These included Asteroids, Space Invaders, and Centipede. There were also games that Atari designed themselves specifically for the console. One kind of interesting game was Breakout, which was designed by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976. Incidentally, that was the same time that Apple launched.
Did you try Breakout with a moving wall? Did you try Breakout with an extra ball?
The 2600, which launched in 1977, continued to be in production through 1986. In that time, they sold millions of units. So the question is, why did this gaming platform, which was so popular because it was really the first avenue for the typical American household to play video games in their home, begin to lose market share so dramatically? And the answer is threefold. The first is an obvious one, and that's that when you create a new category, other players are going to come in and want a piece of that pie. So we had Activision, ColecoVision, and Television. These were different gaming consoles that offered, in many ways, superior performance to the 2600 and were beginning to erode the market share just by virtue of being other players in the same space. Another variable was a fault of Atari's, which is that they were rushing titles to market before they were really fully baked. Some of the titles were quite popular and performed really well. Others that were ports over from arcade games were less successful. Pac-Man, for example, is widely criticized as not being a very optimized version of the video game experience that you might have in an arcade. Another one that's notorious is E.T. This was done in promotion with the Spielberg movie. The game was so bad that they actually mass buried the cartridges in a landfill in New Mexico, just universally panned. So Atari rushing games to market, other gaming consoles, that was already like a big red flag. Then the final variable, and I think that this is really the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back, was that personal computers or home computers began to come down in price. So you saw things coming online like the Commodore 64, which used audio cassettes instead of traditional cartridges. That was a very popular platform at the time, as was the TI-99/4A. That's one that I personally used, which had popular titles like Parsec and superior graphics to what Atari offered. You also had ColecoVision, which saw the writing on the wall. They released something called the Atom, which was a computer that could still use the ColecoVision cartridges, but offered a bundled dot matrix printer and productivity tools that a video gaming console like Atari would never be able to match.
You'll never finish by morning.
No problem.
Now, command the powers of Adam.
And so in 1983, there was actually a video game market crash. Basically, everyone that wanted a gaming console by that point had been served, and there really wasn't any more growth. The market continued to stagnate all the way until 1985, when Nintendo released the NES with popular titles like Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda, and that kind of reignited interest in the space. But by that point, Atari had sort of fallen by the wayside. While they did offer subsequent gaming platforms along the way, the market had shrank to the point where there just wasn't anywhere near the scale that they had built previously.
Atari just reinvented the video game. Incredible, huh?
Interestingly, the founders of Atari had another project under their belts that is familiar to a lot of people, and that's the Chuck E. Cheese franchise. So not only did they innovate with the home video gaming console, they also had this idea of a pizza parlor where kids could go and have birthday parties and play video games, and that became Chuck E. Cheese, which we know today.
Chuck E. Cheese, where a kid can be a kid.
Now, if you like this story and stories like it, definitely subscribe to this channel. If you had an Atari 2600 back in the day, or maybe you played on one of the competitive units, we'd love to hear from you on that as well. Be sure to give us a like and stay tuned for future episodes of Ground Floor Innovation. Thanks for joining us.